We got one more guest, one more segment left for this week on Bang the Book Radio. That is Handicapping the Hardwood with Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Going all right, man. It's Friday, busy day here. Everybody else always says, hey, it's Friday. It's the last day of the week. Friday is just another day to me. Friday night's a busier night, and Saturday is a busier day for me than most of them, especially in college basketball season.
Yeah, for sure. The only way that I know what day it is based on which guests are on the show. I mean, every other day, they just run together when you work in this business, and you really don't get a day off. And if you take a day off, and you and I were talking about this a little bit, while that segment was finishing up. This week you've had some medical appointments to take your son to. You've kind of been out of the loop a little bit, and even for as long as you've been doing this business, you were telling me that. Missing a day is it's hard to come back from.
It is. You miss. I essentially missed 2 days, or at least two, the majority of the days with his appointments. And first of all, I want to say thanks to everybody who's reached out to me as far as how he's doing. Right now he's not doing that bad. It seems like he has some pretty bad asthma issues, and we'll try to work through those, and hopefully everything works out okay, but at least we have a plan to try to help things going forward. But as a dad, that's certainly stressful when things have not been going great with my son who's that young, and that adds stress just to life in general. And then being away for 2 days and it being such a busy time as far as college hoops, I've said this on the show before. I spend a lot of time on college basketball. There are so many teams. I feel like I know these teams pretty well, all these teams well. And with there being more games lined this year, it's made even more work, to be honest with you. You got to know the teams, the Kennesaw States, the Liberties, the teams like that. But in the past, it didn't really matter if I didn't know that much about a team like that, because their games were never lined anyway. So a very busy time of the year for me when it's college basketball time. And, like I've said before, I love this time of the year as far as college basketball. Between it and college football, it's hard for me to say what's my favorite sport, but they're definitely my favorite sports. But definitely a very busy time, and feel like you're playing catch up and then going into the weekend knowing how huge that Saturday card is as well.
Yeah, and the thing is, too, you miss with college football or the NFL, it's once a week, but if you're a little bit tied up on a weekend, something like that, in the NFL, maybe you have 16 box scores to go back through. In college football, maybe it's 50 or 60. In college basketball, I think there were 150 games last Saturday. So, the time it takes to catch up on everything, go back through, see if teams, played differently because of an injury or any of those different types of angles, it is very time consuming. It is something that takes a lot of time and effort. And, when you're pulled away from that, for especially the reasons that you were, it does make it extremely difficult to get back into that mindset and catch up with everything. But, I know that you will do that. And fortunately today on Friday, not a very in-depth college basketball card. But we're going to continue with our conference-by-conference breakdowns here, and we're going to go out to the Big West. So before we talk about some trends and angles and kind of organize these teams, overall, what are your impressions of this conference this year?
Well, the Big West is always a weak conference. When you think of the Big West and when they get into NCAA tournament, they're always going to be a really low seed or high seed, however you want to say, 15 seed, a 14 seed, 16 seed, depending on who gets in there. But, they're not going to be a team that I would think would have much of a chance to win a game in the NCAA tournament. This is a sloppy conference, a lot of the teams are close together. There's not too many really bad travel spots here in this conference, but this is a conference where there's a lot of sloppy basketball played. There's a lot of turnovers. You could say, well, it looks like the defenses are good because their efficiency on offense is not very good. But if you watch the games, you realize that most of the teams, it's not really that the defense is that good. It's just that, they throw the ball away a lot, and it's hard to, have a really high turnover percentage and still be very efficient on offense. So, you do certainly get some good defenses in this conference. And kind of like I said about the Big Sky, it's the rare teams that play really good defense in a conference like this that are almost always the teams that win the league.
All right, so as we look at some angles and some trends, some really profitable long-term stuff here, and, as you mentioned, this is one of the conferences where you've had the most success in the long run. What are some of those trends and angles, specifically in terms of looking at teams that are on the road?
Yeah, a couple right off the top is underdogs are 51.3% ATS since 2005. Since 2010, 52.9% on underdogs. Certainly not a huge angle there or anything, but it's something, it's still there, and there's an edge toward the underdogs, and I think that makes sense based on, a lot of these games are pretty close. Like I said, they're not terribly high scoring because both teams are usually pretty sloppy. And, these teams aren't separated by that much other than the teams right at the top, at least this year. And I think there's a little bit bigger difference in the Big West this year than there normally is. The second one, which I think is really impressive, is road teams. Road teams 542 and 459. It's 54.1% ATS. I mean, you're talking a big sample size there, and that's since 2005. So road teams have done really well in this conference. Yeah, I think that makes sense. I don't think there's great home court advantages here. You don't have any place that I can really think of here where you say, man, this is a raucous environment. It's so much different than everywhere else. Hawaii is the one that's different than everybody else just because it's such a long road trip. And obviously Hawaii has a harder time when they travel as well because they're playing almost all their games at home for a long time, and they go finally in the conference season and have to play some road games. But the road teams have done extremely well here, and I wanted to point out one specific angle, which I like this one quite a bit, is road teams on the first game of their road trip against home teams that are coming off a road game, meaning it's their first game at home, are hitting 58% since 2010. 58% ATS when it's your first road game and the other team's in their first home game of this stretch. I think that's a pretty impressive angle, and I think that's one that makes quite a bit of sense to me here. The teams on a long road trip, say you've played 3 or 4 games in a row on the road, haven't done as well, but teams on that first game of a road trip have done really well.
Yeah, that's a really interesting trend. I mean, why do you think that is? Is it, because of the nature of the travel here where, you're doing a lot of travel within the state of California? I mean, Hawaii, the only team not in California. So maybe there are some bus trips. Maybe it's not a conference where you're doing a ton of flying. Do you feel like maybe that's the reason why?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are. I think that these teams take buses a decent amount of time. I don't think they have much of a budget here, but I think that it's an extension of the angle before it, in that the road teams are 54.1% ATS since 2005. So usually the first game of a road trip, a team's going to do better than they are later in a road trip, and this is across all sports. I mean, you look at teams in college football that have played 4 straight road games. They haven't done very well later in their road trip. The same is true in college basketball. It's just a little bit more here in the Big West than most of the other conferences. And I think, you get a team going on a road trip, and in the first game they're very focused. This is a key road trip for us, and they haven't had to fight any kind of real adversity yet. They come into that game, just ready to go, and you get the home team that could be, a little bit lackadaisical. It's their first home game back from a couple road games. Hey, we're at home. This is going to come more easily. It's easy to have that letdown spot in that first home game. So I think that between the fact that road teams have done well and that, I think that adds some sense here.
Well, another one that you mentioned here that, road teams that struggled, particularly those that struggled a little bit in the non-conference, I would assume, based on how this trend sets up, road teams that have had some issues against the number away from home do wind up playing pretty well in this conference.
Yeah, and this is a really good angle. I mean, road teams with a road cover percentage of 50% or lower for the year, 57.2% ATS in the Big West Conference play since 2005. And again, if you tighten this one up and make it since 2010, it's almost 60%. So, these trends have all been fairly strong. If you go back all the way to 2005, they've been even stronger here in recent years. And I don't really know why it would be even stronger now than it was then. That could just be noise as far as the numbers there. But I do think that, it makes a lot of sense that a team that hasn't really been that good on the road for the season overall, so maybe these teams from the Big West, like you said, go out on the road and play a team from the Pac-10 or the Mountain West or something like that, and they're just getting drummed on because they're just not nearly as good as a team like that. And then you come into the Big West, and people are looking at it and seeing, look how bad they did in the road games. I mean, this team's no good. And then they're catching 7 points when they should have been catching 4 or 5. And they're covering at a pretty consistent rate here in conference play because, like I said, there are a lot of close games in the Big West conference play. If you go back and look, there are also a lot of close spreads. So you're not going to be seeing very many where, a team in the Big West is catching 12 or 13 points. It's just almost never going to happen because these teams are too close together.
Well, and before we rank these teams a little bit, one more trend to talk about it, and this has to do a lot with the inefficiency that you mentioned on offense.
Yeah, the under's 5'8", 473 since 2005. That's 52.3%. That's been pretty steady as I look through the years here. A lot of sloppy basketball, like I said before. You get these teams that, like the UC Irvine does a really good job uglying up the game. They're really not very good on offense, but they play really hard defense. They are very physical. They're a quality team. I mean, I think they're well coached. Hawaii's been able to do stuff like that in recent years with their new coach there. I think that, it's just a mark of the league being what it is, a league where there's a lot of teams in the middle of the pack that it's hard to separate, numbers 4, 5, and 6 from each other. But they all are fairly similar in what they do and what their shortcomings are as well.
All right, so let's sort of look at the hierarchy of the teams out here in the Big West Conference, and this is a little bit like the Sun Belt that we talked about, I believe, last week. I don't think it was on Monday's show. Could have been Monday's show. Like I said, all the days run together. But this is one where you've kind of got a top dog, and then a lot of times the teams below them are sort of interchangeable from year to year or maybe go in streaks.
Yeah, and to me, UC Irvine's been the top dog here for a little bit. We remember a few years ago when Irvine had Njai in the middle of the floor, and they were just dominating the Big West in general then. They're not really a dominant team now. I wouldn't say they're way better than everybody else in this league, but, they're the team to beat. UC Irvine, 54th in the country, according to Ken Palm, in defensive efficiency, 14th in effective field goal percentage defense. They don't give you anything close to the rim. They're only giving up 41.8% on 2-point shots. So if you're going to beat them, you're going to have to make some threes. And there's not very many teams in this league that are really that good at making threes. So I think that plays to their strength, and I think that Russell Turner knew that that's the type of league that this is. So if you're going to beat them, to get hot from deep, and obviously some teams will do that, but it's not going to be very consistently. To me, I think number 2 teams are just, I put them on the same line here. UCSB and Fullerton, and I know Fullerton just absolutely drummed them last night, 81-60. I will say Fullerton's a team that we talked about a couple shows ago. Like I said, to be totally honest with you, the days are kind of running together for me, so I can't remember which day we talked about this, but I remember talking about Fullerton being a good buy low team, and they've won 3 straight now. This Fullerton team is much better than they looked with their record, and I think they'll continue to be better. You probably can still get some value on Fullerton here for at least a couple more games because, their overall cover percentage for the season is still not very good. At least I don't believe it is. But UCSB, also a good team. I like UCSB's coach and Pasternak. Very efficient on offense compared to most teams in the Big West. So here's one of the rare teams that doesn't turn the ball over very much and is a pretty good shooting team as well. And then after that, to me, you go from Irvine, UCSB, and Fullerton tied, and I think it's a pretty big drop-off to the rest. I have Long Beach State next. Long Beach State always schedules a really good schedule. I mean, I don't think they played as tough of a schedule this year as some years, but they're still 32nd toughest schedule in non-conference play. So they certainly, scheduled up pretty well. Arizona State, Mississippi State, USC, Oregon State. They're certainly test themselves. So, when they get into conference play, that helps them quite a bit, because they're playing teams that are a lot worse than what they played in the non-conference slate. I have UC Davis next, partially because UC Davis is one of those teams that can play defense in this league. And like I said, if you can play defense in this league, you're always going to have a chance, because most teams here are just sloppy. They're not very good at defense. They're, fouling a lot, things like that. You can definitely get some really sloppy basketball in the Big West. Like I said, it's certainly a conference that I've done very well in on the long term. And I think it's because, I kind of know that this conference is what it is. It's different than quite a few of the other mid-majors. Almost every year the Big West looks to be about the same conference as it was the year before. I think the only difference right now is that there's a little bit more of a difference between the top three teams and the rest of the league. Hawaii I have right after that. Hawaii's done pretty well here so far this year, 11-7. I think that they have a good coach in Gano, the former assistant at St. Mary's. I'm impressed with the job he's done there. They catch people in some bad spots in their home games. They just lost in overtime to UC Irvine the other night, a game that Hawaii certainly could have won. We'll see how they bounce back from that. They have 3 straight home games here coming up against Davis, Long Beach, and UC Santa Barbara. All 3 teams that are pretty competitive here in this league, so I'm curious to see how Hawaii bounces back from there. A tough loss against Irvine. And then the final 3 I have Cal State Northridge. A big-name coach there at Cal State Northridge now that's been at a lot bigger programs than he is right now. I'm curious to see how Mark Gottfried does there. So far, his team is first in offensive efficiency, but they're very poor on defense. So we'll see if they can get better on defense moving forward. The last couple from me, UC Riverside. This is a team that's been at the bottom of the league or very close to the bottom of the league for a long time now. And then Cal Poly. Cal Poly a few years ago, if you remember, they made it into the Big Dance, kind of a stunner that they made it there. But, man, they have been playing some bad basketball this year, 4-13. They just lost by 23 points on Wednesday night at home to UC Riverside. So rough year for the Mustangs.
Yeah, for sure. And, you look at UC Santa Barbara, really bad shooting performance from two-point land in that game against Cal State Fullerton. So maybe UC Santa Barbara, a bounce-back team here this weekend, kind of playing against that outlier. But, you mentioned UC Irvine being the top dog here, and we talked about this with regards to both the Big Sky and the Sun Belt. It's kind of tough to get back to playing basketball after you play that top team, and there is a trend with UC Irvine, well, I guess with UC Irvine's opponents, that is something that people want to pay attention to.
Yeah, teams are 25-38 ACS in their last 63 after playing UC Irvine in their last game. This makes a lot of sense to me. UC Irvine, much more physical than most teams in this league. They're committing quite a few fouls just because they're so aggressive on defense. They've consistently been the team to beat in this league now for a few years. And I didn't go any farther back with this angle because, if you go back 10 years ago, UC Irvine was not good. So to me, it doesn't matter, what they did 10 years ago. UC Irvine the last few years has been a very good team. So 25-38 ATS, the team that just played UC Irvine in their next game. So if you are looking in the Big West to back a team, I would be a little bit hesitant if that team just played UC Irvine last game.
All right, so let's look at some regression candidates here. And we'll look at the Summit League, by the way, on Monday's edition of Bang the Book Radio as we keep going through our conference-by-conference breakdowns. Only 8 teams, I believe, in that league, so that one won't take us too much time. But we get into the regression candidates here. Let's start with a negative regression candidate. And, in fact, this is a team that has already dropped 7 in a row, and you expect things to get worse.
Yeah, Fordham's defense. I think this is specifically a look where defensively, Fordham looks like they're a pretty good team. They're 110th in effective field goal percentage defense, according to Ken Palm, 115th according to Bart Torvik. And I know that Adam has referenced Bart Torvik in some of the videos over on YouTube for Bang the Book. And I have to tell you, I think that Bart Torvik's work is pretty great as well. Everybody knows about Ken Palm. Torvik has a great website as well with some of the trends. You can look and see how a team's doing compared to what they were earlier in the season. That can be really helpful for things such as effective field goal percentage defense, things such as tempo. Certainly, I think that's another good site to check out as you're doing your research. But, there's no way that Fordham's going to finish as high as 110th in effective field goal percentage defense. They've played the 353rd toughest slate of offenses this year. Well, how many teams are there in the country? There's 353. So this team plays very slowly, but I'd be really careful taking low unders with this Fordham team. All of their numbers are going to be low because they play slowly. They've had some pretty low-scoring games so far this year. If anything, I'd be looking to, take some overs, especially if they're really low numbers here coming up, because Fordham is going to start playing some better offenses than what they've played so far. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that Fordham's about to play, Duke and teams like that, Gonzaga, teams that are just excellent on offense. But, they've played the weakest slate of offenses of anybody in the country so far this year. So when you have upcoming games against Dayton is definitely good at offense. You got games against Davidson, Richmond's another good offense. You're going to have some higher scoring games than what you've had earlier. So I want to see what kind of totals they put out there. And also, don't be afraid to lay some points against Fordham in a game where the opposition is pretty good at offense and they're going to push the pace because, Fordham is going to lose some games pretty badly. They're really weak on offense, and they're not nearly as good on defense as what it looks like they are.
One of the things I really love about Torvik's site is when you go to the specific team pages, you can put a lot of qualifiers in there, against top 50, top 100 teams, against conference teams, stuff like that. Fordham for the season here, adjusted defensive efficiency over at BartTorvik.com, 104.2. That's 196th in the country. When you select just conference games, their adjusted defensive efficiency drops to 111.4, which would be among the worst in the country. So Fordham's defense is regressing here. This is a train you want to jump on pretty soon, I think, because there's a chance that the odds makers and other bettors do catch up to this. But one thing about Fordham, they're 41st in the country, 44.5% of their field goal attempts coming from three-point range. So Kyle mentioned playing overs with them. If they run into a team that's not good at defending the perimeter, that could be one of those higher scoring games.
Yeah, I think that's a great point also that they're shooting that many threes. I knew it was a very high percentage. I didn't know it was that high. If they're playing a team that is very good at defending behind the three-point line, then they need to be more nervous about taking it over. Just because, Fordham might not get much themselves. But, certainly I think the Fordham defense is already regressing, and it's going to regress even further.
Well, we're going to mention UTSA twice here on the remaining minutes of Handicapping the Hardwood. They are our positive regression team, and then we'll talk about them from a game standpoint here in a couple of minutes. What specifically are you looking at? Sorry,
I couldn't hear anything for a little while there, but it must have cut out on me. I wasn't sure if I was even still connected. Anyways, UTSA, I apologize for putting them on here twice. I will say that when UTSA, when I was looking at regression candidates, I put them here because I think that they're a really good regression candidate as far as their offense. But then when I started looking at games I wanted to talk about, when I saw their game here for Saturday, I had to include it because it's such a really good spot. But UTSA playing the 63rd toughest slate of defenses so far this year. Look at what their effective field goal percentage offense is. And I don't have what it is on Bart Torvik right in front of me right now. It is 300th on Ken Palm, or at least it was last night. I know that UTSA just absolutely thumped Charlotte last night, which fortunately was a play in the daily free pick article at BangTheBook.com. There's a should we call that? I guess we'd call that a shameless plug. But UTSA helped everybody out there last night. But to me, UTSA, a team that's better on offense than what they look like. They play very quickly. They haven't been very efficient so far this year. They really only play two good defenses the rest of the year. So I'm saying this is a long-term look. The two real good defenses they play are the next two teams that they play in the conference here in Conference USA. So a lot of questionable defenses after that, and I think UTSA's offense will improve.
UTSA 47% effective field goal percentage overall, 299th in the country according to Torvik. In conference, though, 50.8% effective field goal percentage. So they are getting better here, as you mentioned. And, again, I mean, this is the thing you want to look for here in the sports betting market is this is an investment market. You want to look for these buy points. You want to look to buy low and sell high. And with UTSA, maybe this is starting to pick up a little bit of steam, but I still think there's value to get into the market on them now.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that this is one where, they're not a very big name team. We've talked about before that we really like talking about teams that aren't going to get the publicity. I really think that's what separates, Bang the Book and this show from a lot of others that you're going to hear. I mean, everybody else is going to break down the Duke game, the North Carolina game. Not very many people are talking about UTSA and the trends about them. And, we're talking Big West here today, or we just talked Big West. You're not going to hear about the Big West hardly anywhere. So I think that UTSA is going to be a good look going forward for some higher scoring games. And, I think they could be a good back ATS as well.
Yeah, that's a game last night played at 63 possessions. They scored 88 points. But, one last point on UTSA here. Over their last 5 games, 31 3-point attempts against Rice, only 19 against North Texas, which was a very strong win for them, 37 against Middle Tennessee State on January 17th, 41 against UAB on the 19th, and then 30 last night against Charlotte. They were 12 for 30. They're chucking a ton of threes right now. You think that's something that will continue for them?
Yeah, I'm surprised they're shooting that many threes, to be totally honest with you. I think that's increased quite a bit from what they were in the past. So, I don't know if there's a real reason for why they've decided to do that so much more. I mean, if you look on the year, they've shot quite a few. Last year, I know they shot a lot of threes. I thought they had backed off a little bit this year, but they've kind of gone back that way here lately. So I'm not really sure, if there's a reason for that or not, but obviously, they've played some pretty good basketball here of late, so maybe they think that's one of their strengths.
All right, so let's get into some games here for this week. And again, as I mentioned, we'll talk about the Summit League coming up here on Monday, so you want to make sure that you tune in for that. Let's go to the SEC versus Big 12 Challenge. Iowa State and Ole Miss, one of the first games of the day, looks like one of the best games of the day.
Yeah, and the first thing I want to say is that there are a decent amount of these non-conference games late in the year here. These have been good to the over in the past. So keep that in mind if you're betting totals here on Saturday's slate. I think that the market is going to know this. So I'm trying to say this so that people know where the line's going to move, as well as knowing that, if the line's getting bet up, that's probably the reason for it. A lot of these non-conference games late in the season, the big difference that you see is the teams play faster. They're just a little bit more free. Hey, this isn't one of the teams that we're used to playing against. Let's have a little bit of fun. Let's get up and down the court a little bit. Definitely are higher scoring games. The odds makers are going to adjust to some degree. Is it going to be enough? I think we'll see money come in on the over in most of these games. So if you like the over, you probably want to play it early. Iowa State and Mississippi, to me, this is a really interesting spot for a game as well. That Iowa State just went to Kansas and lost 80-76. Now, that was the beginning of this week, so that helps them at least somewhat. But that was a really crazy game because Iowa State was ahead by 8 points there in the second half, went just ice cold for a while, allowed Kansas to take the lead back, and then had a couple shots late to make it really close again. They lost 80-76. If you look at who Iowa State plays after this, they play West Virginia, Texas, Oklahoma. I mean, there's really no nights off in the Big 12. We've talked about that before. So this game likely means less to them than their other games in the Big 12. Mississippi, they've been a really good team so far this year. They're coming off a 74-53 loss to Alabama last game. Just terrible on offense in that game, 0.83 points per possession. 16 turnovers in that game were really killer. I think this is a better spot for Mississippi than it is for Iowa State, but I think Iowa State's the better team. So this is a difficult call for me on the side. I would lean toward Mississippi based on, I think this game means more to them, especially since they just got blown out in the last game. And if you look at Mississippi, I mean, they play Florida after this as well, so you could say that there could be a look-ahead spot to Florida. I think it's a tougher spot, though, for Iowa State because this isn't really, a short travel spot either. And you're going there to play that early game on Saturday, non-conference. This would not be surprising if we see Iowa State look bad in this game and, lose by 15 points. I think that's one of those possibilities that if it were a Big 12 game, you wouldn't think was a very high likelihood. In a game like this, it wouldn't surprise me at all.
And I think this is one of those situations where, when you've got these challenge series between conferences, I think for a first-year head coach like Kermit Davis, this game means a little bit more to him and a little bit more to the program. For Steve Prohm at Iowa State, a Sweet 16 run in his first year. They were a 5 seed in 2017. They'll probably be a 4 or 5 seed, something like that here this year. They missed the tournament last year, but that's a program that's already established. And I think Ole Miss is trying to get to that point here with Kermit Davis. So I think these showcase games, these cross-conference, really resume boosters, for lack of a better term, I think this game means a lot more to Mississippi in that regard as well.
Yeah, I think so as well. And I think it's going to be interesting to see where this line is. As I look at it right now, Ken Palm has Mississippi to lose by 1. Bart Torvik has Mississippi minus 0.6. Probably almost on pick'em for this game. Certainly if I had to take a side, I would lean toward Mississippi. I'm not saying that this is going to be one of my stronger looks for Saturday. I would also look toward the over here. Mississippi's been efficient on offense this year, 29th in offensive efficiency according to Ken Palm. Iowa State 15th. So you have two good offenses here. Iowa State likes to play up-tempo. Mississippi slightly faster than the average team. So, certainly my lean here would be the over as well.
All right, so we move on from that game here. Conference USA. We've had a lot of spots in Conference USA that we've been talking about here this week. I know you talked about them a lot in your situational article as well. Old Dominion and UTSA. What's going on with this game?
I really don't know what Conference USA was doing with this schedule. I mean, it makes no sense to me. They condense everything in a big way here. Old Dominion playing their 5th game since January 17th. Now, if you look at how they've done in those games, and let's take it back one game farther than that. The game before that, they won at FIU 75-74. I believe they had a buzzer beater to win that game. Then on the 17th, they beat Louisiana Tech 64-63. Another 1-point win. They win at home against Southern Miss 78-60. They go on the road, play a really bad first half against Charlotte, and come out of the break really hot, win 76-70. They go to UTEP, which is at a higher elevation, on Thursday night, play UTEP to a 50-48 win. It was tied 48-48 with a minute left in that game. They ended up winning by 2 points. UTEP is not nearly as good as UTSA. And this being the end of a road trip and the 5th game since January 17th, this is a really, really bad spot for Old Dominion, about as bad a spot as you could ever find. Like I said, I think UTSA, an improving team. UTSA's played one game this week so far, and that was their 88-43 win over Charlotte. So obviously that game, didn't get as much. The guys were able to rest more. There wasn't as much of a push there as what there would have been in a close game. So I think UTSA comes into this game pretty fresh. Old Dominion, not fresh at all. I will say last year when they played, Old Dominion beat UTSA 100-62 at Old Dominion last year. I would think that UTSA, looking for revenge in a game like this, I think this game will be pretty close to pick 'em as well. It'd be interesting to see, how much the odds makers put into this spot, because UTSA has to be power rated lower than Old Dominion, but the situation that you're in, 5th game in that many days, and then it's the 3rd straight road game playing after elevation. As we talked about before in Conference USA, Old Dominion is not very close to UTEP and UTSA. This is a long trip. So UTSA is a game that I will certainly consider here on Saturday. Very curious to see what this line comes out at.
Yeah, it should be interesting to see. I mean, I don't know. And also you got to keep in mind, too, with UTSA's most recent performance, how much is that factored into the line? Does that create a little bit of price inflation? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see, but it should be an interesting game nonetheless. Let's go down to the Sun Belt here. Texas State, Georgia Southern, a lot of angles to consider for this game.
Yeah, Texas State has been getting beat by Georgia State pretty consistently, and it's one of those teams that, Georgia State's the team that everybody's gunning for. We talked about this when we talked about this conference, that, Georgia State's been the big dog for a while now. Texas State now leads this conference after beating Georgia State on the road 81-68. The big surprise about that is Texas State did it with 3-point shooting. They made 13 3-pointers. Pearson made 7 3-pointers by himself, 1.25 points per possession. They led by 20 points with 2 minutes left, so this game was not close in the second half. Texas State off a really, really impressive performance. They're 17-3 so far this year. They've been very good. Here's the thing that interests me about this game, though. Texas State strength of schedule, according to Ken Palm, 280th. Georgia Southern strength of schedule, 75th. So, Adam, you know what's going to happen with this line. It's going to move toward Georgia Southern. So whatever this comes out at, say Georgia Southern opens a 1-point favorite or it opens a pick-em, it's probably going to finish, 2 points higher than that toward Georgia Southern, because these are consistently getting bet on as far as their strength of schedule discrepancy games. And I have to say, I would like Georgia Southern in this game. Another game that I'll consider as a premium based on, how good of a value I think the price is. But to me, Georgia Southern's a good team. They're coming off a home loss to UT Arlington. UT Arlington was a team that we just talked about a week or two ago as far as a good buy low team. They won 5 straight games now after a really bad start. They played a really tough schedule. Young team. They're playing much better now. Texas State coming off that huge win over Georgia State on the road. Now they have to play another game not very close to home here at Georgia Southern. And Georgia Southern's coming off that loss. So I think there's a lot, very fascinating handicap here, and I certainly lean toward the home team.
Well, we did talk about the Sun Belt on last Thursday's recording for the Friday show. After Georgia State games, in the next game, the team 35-52 ATS in the last 87 games. So that's the spot here for Texas State in this one. So get everything kind of coming together here on this edition of Bang the Book Radio. One more game to talk about here. This one from a major conference, a major game here to say the least. Another big test for Sparty on the road at Purdue. Maybe struggled a little bit at the end of the first half against Iowa. Very dominant second half for Tom Izzo's team. How do you see Sunday's game playing out between Michigan State and Purdue?
Well, Michigan State has proven themselves to be the top dog in the Big Ten at this point. I mean, they're on a really nice winning streak. Their only loss since the first game of the year was a loss at Louisville in overtime. And Louisville is better than everybody thought they were going to be. Chris Mack doing a really good job there. So that's not really a bad loss. They have some nice road wins. Does Michigan State in spots where they were down in the second half, and they come back and win. They won at Florida. They won at Ohio State. They won at Iowa. They won at Nebraska, which is certainly a really nice win. Purdue's a better team than they look like they were. And we talked about Purdue a few episodes ago as well, as far as a team that was, probably a little bit underrated. And they have been a good buy low team. And I have to say, I sound like I'm tooting my own horn here a lot. It almost makes me uncomfortable. But at the same time, it's good that we're giving out some good information. Hopefully somebody's made some money on it. That's always my goal, and I know Adam's goal as well, is to help people make some money and help them become more educated when it comes to betting on college basketball or whatever sport it is that we're talking about. To me, Purdue, they would be my slight lean in this game. However, I have to say, I think Michigan State's the better team. It's not an ideal spot for Michigan State. They've been playing on the road here a lot of late. They did expend a decent amount of energy in the second half in that game against Iowa. They're quite a bit better than Iowa. They're not nearly as much better than Purdue. Purdue is a team that is so efficient on offense, almost as efficient as Michigan State. And as we talked about a few episodes ago, their defense is better than they looked earlier this season. A few weeks ago, they were like 75th in defensive efficiency. Now they're up to 58th. Michigan State's going to get their points in this. I really think the big key is on the glass here. Can Purdue hold their own? Michigan State can really dominate on the offensive glass. They're getting back almost 40% of their shots in the Big Ten so far this year. If Purdue can limit their second shot opportunities, Purdue certainly has a shot in this game. I think that this is one of those games that could really springboard things for Purdue if they play well in this game, because Purdue was a little bit off the radar for a while when they were sitting at 9-6. People concerned about them. What's wrong with Purdue? Here's a chance for them to get that really marquee win. I know that they won at Wisconsin, which was certainly a big win, and then they won at Ohio State, but Ohio State's not really that good. This would be a really big win, and obviously there's going to be a lot of eyes on this game as well.
Yeah, and something that's interesting for me about this game is the total. Because we talked about Michigan State. We talked about how high their tempo was in the non-conference. They've played one game in Big Ten play at 70 possessions. They've had they've had 3 games at 69, nothing higher than 70. And Purdue is a team that's kind of slowed down the tempo a little bit too. Their last 3 games, 67, 64, 67 possessions. And the Wisconsin game played at 73, went to overtime. So maybe some value on the under here for this game a little bit. But then again, you've got a Michigan State team very efficient on offense, Purdue very efficient on offense. So even if we play with a lower number of possessions here, still could find a way to go over the total. But I have noticed that I did have the under as a video pick in the January 8th game between Michigan State and Purdue, that, Sparty totals have been a little bit too high here of late.
Yeah, I would lean toward the under in this game as well. And if you look at that first meeting, the tempo was 64 possessions, which is, if this one's at 64 possessions, the under is going to have a lot of value because, we're going to have a total in the high 140s. Probably, 146, 147 would be my best guess for where their line will be. I think that this is one where it wouldn't surprise me if the market bets the total down. I usually talk about, and it usually does happen, that the over gets bet more often than not. So if you want to play the under, you wait till later. I think that might be the opposite in this game because I think that most people will see the fact that these two teams are playing a little bit slower. They're both pretty good at defense. Obviously, both of these offenses are very efficient. So there's a chance that this one could be a really high-scoring game, and it wouldn't be too shocking. But I have to agree that I would lean toward the under here. And I will say that Purdue has a pretty quick revenge spot here from losing by 18 points there to Michigan State on January 8th. That game was really a little bit closer than that final score looked. I believe Michigan State was up by about 8 or 9 points. With 9 minutes left or something like that. Purdue didn't score for a really long time at the end of that game. So I think that game was closer than the final score would indicate.
Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper at huntersportspicks.com and also daily contributor to BangTheBook.com. What's going on over at your website right now, man?
Check out huntersportspicks.com. Lowered prices on college basketball subscriptions. I'm still doing the special here for Bang the Book listener. If you're interested in college basketball the rest of the year, $425 now for the rest of the year. You can message me at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter, Kyle at huntersportspicks.com. Also sign up for that free picks newsletter. I'll be sending free picks throughout the rest of the season. I'll also be doing some contests to win some cash prizes, free premium plays, things like that. So look for that. And also look for my work at BangTheBook.com and check out the videos that I'm starting to do there. We've had the Sharp Money video here on Wednesdays, and then on Friday, so later today, I'm going to be recording one that looks at some of the key games for Saturday on the slate for college basketball. I like to try to break down some of the games. And there are so many games on Saturday, it's nice to be able to isolate a few that there could be some value on or there's an interesting situation on. So we'll be doing that. And then certainly check out the daily article there. The plays have done very well so far this year. I know I had a lot of positive feedback about those. We'll keep grinding and see how we can do going forward on that, and appreciate everybody reading that as well.
Well, of course, next week we'll also talk with Kyle about the Super Bowl and get some prop stuff in along with our usual college basketball content. Kyle Hunter, huntersportspicks.com, and also daily contributor to BangTheBook.com at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Time as always, man. Thank you so much, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right, talk to you then. Thanks.